Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Lee Jeyes is back from a cross-Canada tour and on the mic, ready to share his insights and advice around pragmatic retail innovation, informed by years of experience, most formerly as Walmart Canada's head of innovation. Get ready for a great conversation as we explore where retail meets innovation and hear Lee's advice for retailers and brands of all sizes on how they can drive the innovation agenda in your enterprise. Lee, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, where am I finding you today? Is it this morning, this afternoon? Where are you?
It is this afternoon. I'm actually back in Toronto. I've just come back from a 3-month trip where I've traveled all across Canada. I've got to see it from East Coast to the West Coast in an RV. So it's been 3 months on the road. So it's kind of strange being back in the city after I've been, in the bush for 3 months. But it's been an incredible trip and something on the bucket list. But yeah, I'm back in Toronto now for the month of October.
Well, judging by your accent, I suspect you're not from Canada. In fact, I know you're not. But what prompted you to travel across the country, and what did you think? You're not new to Canada, but what did you think about your journey?
I'm not. It was. It's actually my 10-year anniversary being in Canada next week. So I've been here for almost a decade now, which is just crazy to think. But it's just always been a goal of mine. My retail career started relatively early on, and I got to the wonderful age of 30 and said, "Wow, like you've spent most of your life focusing on your career," and I didn't have the opportunity in my younger years to go traveling or to see the world. So. I've always wanted to travel, never thought it was going to be in an RV, but I took the opportunity to take the time and see the country. It frankly was incredible. It was everything that I'd hoped for and more. There's something so special about driving through the Rockies. Yeah. You can just, for hours, it just keeps giving, right? Every twist and turn gives you something new. Which was just incredible. And I got to see everything that I wanted to see, from bear to moose to mountains to waterfalls. And I also had the opportunity to bring some of my family along for the trip too. So I had my sister and 2 nieces for a month, and then I brought my mum along for a month, which was just incredible to be able to have that experience with my mum. You don't get the opportunity to spend a month with your mum at 30 years old. So. Yeah. Well, what an adventure. I mean, I think many Canadians would benefit from that. I've had the ability to travel across the Canada, but I actually too would love to do it in an RV. All right, well, listen, we jumped right in. You and I don't think we've ever actually met in person, because I think it was during the COVID era that we were connected through RCC. Yep. But let's start at the beginning. Who are you? Tell us a bit about your background. You've kind of alluded to it a little bit. Been in Canada for 10 years. Well, what's your personal and professional journey, and what are you doing now? Yeah, so for anyone that don't know me, my first name's Lee, surname Jeyes. I've spent the last 16 and a half years in retail, specifically with Walmart. So I spent just over 9 years with Walmart Canada, and then the remaining 7 years with Asda in the UK when they were owned by Walmart. My story is slightly unique, but I don't think too uncommon in retail. But I started as a 15-year-old boy stacking shelves in my hometown in Northampton, England. Oh, gee. Yeah, just there for a Christmas temporary job. It was like six weeks of work, and then didn't expect it to be anything other than that. And then here we are, 16, almost 17 years later. Crazy. So in that time, I spent time across operations, loss prevention, e-commerce, and then spent the last 4.5 years in the innovation space. So it's been an incredible journey, and I love retail. And was it, talk about how you came to Canada? I mean, Walmart, big organization, you could have chosen to go in many places, or was it an opportunity you couldn't pass up, or did you want to leave and go international to begin with, and it kind of presented itself? Talk about that a bit. Yeah, it's a unique story too. I guess there's really 2 things. I was Asda's youngest ever store manager at 21, which was really cool. 21? But also, but also nerve-wracking, because a lot of the people I was managing and leading at the time were, aunts and uncles or parents of my high school friends. So I guess I learned pretty early that I wasn't the most important person, and my job was to serve them. Yeah. But I had an opportunity to go on an international development program. Supposed to be for 18 months, actually. I was only supposed to be here for 18 months. And then I went to a shareholders event, which Walmart does every year in Arkansas, met the Canadian team, and then came to Canada for a visit, and then managed to make Canada the country that I chose to come and do an international assignment on. So yeah, that's how it started, and almost 10 years later, I never went back. So it's been the best move of my life, to be honest. I've loved Canada. It's been incredible.
That Walmart meeting, annual meeting, that's legend in retail, right? Big entertainers, big facility, fast moving. It's no ordinary meeting. Tell me about
huge.
that. Yeah,
it's huge. They bring people. I think there's somewhere close to 3,000 associates from across the globe. What's interesting is I actually refused to go the first time. I'm typically extremely introverted, and the thought of being in a large crowd and cheering and being at this big event scared the life out of me. So I said no. And then the following year, my district manager at the time had already signed me up and kind of forced me to go. But yeah, it's a huge event. You get to really see the size and scale of Walmart. You get to bring a lot of cultures together. And then there's some really cool events. You get to see the history. You get to go to the first ever store. You get to tour the stores that are out there. And then there's some pretty famous acts that they're performing. So when I was there, Hugh Jackman was the host, and Elton John and Ed Sheeran were performing together in the evening, which was pretty cool because I loved both of those artists. So, did they bring anybody
whose name our listeners might recognize?
No. It was a cool, surreal moment, but it's an incredible conference.
So you joined Walmart Canada, and Walmart Canada's had, it's interesting because we had a spate here, as you would know, with I guess stretching back to even Target, but even more recently, where you had some U.S.-based companies exit the market. And I spent a lot of time in the U.S., and they're like, what's going on? And I said, you got to understand context. There's far more successful international U.S. companies in Canada than there is failures. I mean, the failures are kind of small, and they're all idiosyncratic reasons. As an international person thinking about Canada, I mean, it does occur. And it is the case that Canada is a different, unique market. Is from your observation sitting here, is that the successful formula that Walmart undertook? I think it is, to kind of get to know the market, take a solid strategy and apply it to the market, but understand the unique dynamics of the market itself.
Yeah, that's it. I think what was interesting when I first moved, Canada was Target had just come to town. Actually, the store manager I'd spent some time with took me to a Target, and I could kind of feel the energy and the nerves in the business when I first moved over, and I didn't really have the background and the context like they'd had. But I know that Walmart and itself had put a lot of plans in place to make sure that they're able to compete against that. But yeah, it's definitely that. What can you take from the US that would work and translate here? But what's uniquely different that you still need to maintain Canadian context on? So I guess the biggest surprise to me coming out of Europe at the time was, as I left, Aldi and Lidl were just at the start of the disruption of the UK market. And there's one part of the story that I don't think too many people talk about, but there was actually a discount retailer in the UK a few years before that Asda or Walmart had acquired called Netto. You might see them elsewhere in Europe. And they were a hard discounter, similar to an Aldi and a Lidl. But Asda made the strategic choice at the time to convert them to more like convenience type locations, Tesco Express, Sainsbury's local type locations. But unfortunately, I think it was now in hindsight the wrong strategy, because the locations weren't in the place where it was convenient. They were more like retail type parks that you would get in the UK. So to be honest, I think people forget that part, that Asda at the time had the opportunity they acquired a discount retailer with a lot of locations, and I think if they had the time again, they would have maintained that hard discount model that has and continued to disrupt the UK market. I'll share an interesting story. At the time, I was living at home with my parents still, and my dad had my discount card for Walmart. And I remember the day that he gave it back to me. And my dad's extremely frugal, and it was a 10% discount. And I said, "What do you mean you're giving me the card back?" He said, "I don't need it anymore." I said, "I'll go to Aldi." And I said, even with my 10% as an associate, they were still cheaper. So that, I think, was a huge learning, not seeing, or at least not my early perceptions, where there was not as much of a hard discounter. Although we do have some great discount retailers in this country, Aldi and Lidl were just a different beast. They were just obliterating the UK market.
I met the president of Action I was in Barcelona in the spring, and they're a Netherlands-based they're just taking share across Europe. I think they're now France is number one. I guess you call them a hard discounter, but I mean, it gets to the core of our conversation we're going to have is like, innovation never stands still. Just because you're strong today doesn't mean you're going to be strong tomorrow, right? That kind of rust never sleeps. There's a Neil Young Canadian reference for you right there. Hey, let's talk about your time innovating, because your last gig at Walmart Canada was in charge of innovation. I'm kind of curious, like on the one hand, and I've been in large organizations and smaller ones, and the benefits of the large organization is you've got tremendous resources at your disposal. You have tremendous scale. Even making small tweaks can add up to big things. Now, on the other hand, you've got lots of sometimes necessary, sometimes unnecessary bureaucracy. Innovations have to be fairly significant. There's a big queue, and to touch a store, it's got to be fairly significant. How do you manage through all that? And maybe you could share some examples, if you could, broadly of wins and even fails where you try to kind of be that leader of innovation. It's a small world. It's a small world. It's a small it's a small word, but it's a big role. Talk about your experience.
Yes, it's huge. I think it's a great question. I think one of my favorite lines that I used to share with peers or anybody coming into the organization was, don't judge me by the idea, judge me by the ability to implement it inside of such a complicated system. So most people want to talk to me about self-checkouts or the actual technology or their innovation themselves. In fact, I'd often refuse to do that inside of the organization when you get invited to go to different stakeholder meetings or different division meetings that want to talk about all the cool tech. And most of my presentation would be that there isn't that much value in me talking about the exact technology or debating that with you. What I can do, though, is try and give you as many lessons of how do you take an idea and scale it inside of an organization that is so complex. That truly is the secret sauce that I think a lot of retailers and new leaders coming into the organization wrestle with. So for me, I guess there was two things that mattered most to me. One was, and I think it was a help. It continues to be a help for me. I started in the front lines of retail, so I truly had the eyes and the ears of the frontline retail associates, the store managers, the district managers. I was one of them as such. Right?
You're always worried about those words of dread. I'm from head office. I'm here to help.
Yes, that's it. And to be honest, you never want a groundswell coming from the front lines of a product or an innovation that doesn't work. That's the quickest way for a project to die in retail is if the frontline employees, are not brought into it. So it's the quickest way for projects to fail. So I think that making sure that I had a true pulse and sense on the associates and the leaders in the stores really helped me. And it seems so obvious, but I think a lot of leaders underestimate that. There was a period in my career where I was responsible as being the filter between all of the projects that would happen in the home office and how they translate into the stores as part of the central operations team. And I would say, Michael, that the number one factor between a successful and a not successful project was how involved were the people on the front lines of the stores, because a lot of people make, I guess, a wrong assumption that when your project's approved by the C-suite or the CFO signs it off, you're good to go. And the reality is the work starts the minute it hits the front line of the stores, because those are the people that need to come to work tomorrow, and your idea changes what they do. So having the front line involved and brought into the programs and being a good pulse has been critical throughout my career. The second has been just bringing people together through cross-functional collaboration. I think it's very easy to think that it's easy to reject bureaucracy. You see it as something that slows you down. It's frustrating. You have senior level approval, so why does everyone else's opinions matter? I actually used to see it as an accelerant because, yes, it may slow you down in the start, but it will pay you so much more dividends later on if you bring people together early on in the process and make sure the work that you're doing, drives a goal for them. I often used to call it the win-win-win, which is a win for your boss, a win for the company, and a win for your stakeholders. And if you can get those three things right, the project will move at a rapid pace, and it becomes our project, not Lee's project, if that makes sense.
Well, let me pick up on that thought, because you know, reflecting what you're saying, sometimes the risk is, and I've seen this happen with chief customer officer. Okay, that individual owns customers. I don't have to worry about it. Or, that one group or role or individual earns innovation, so I don't have to really think about innovation. Somebody else is. Is that a risk as well? I guess that's solved by what you're describing, right? Make sure everybody's brought in to the process.
Yeah, it's definitely a risk. The three, I would say, that are the biggest. First is incentive. Most organizations' incentive structures, even up to the C-suites, are not typically built towards long-term innovation. It's about quarterly earnings, it's about annual bonuses, and it's about in-year return and value. And if you think about the tenure of a C-suite executive, most of them are not there, especially in markets like Canada. You might see as stepping stone markets for bigger markets, although it's becoming a bigger market now. They're typically only there for 2, 3, 4 years. So if you think about longer term innovation on the horizon, many of them aren't incentivized. Neither are the associates in the actual organization for the short term. They're all incentivized for short term returns. So that's the challenge. I think second is making sure that you've really got a good sponsor, a good CFO, because any early stage innovation is expensive, and good and bad ideas look the same at the start. And you really need a CFO to look at it from a portfolio perspective, knowing that, not every single idea that you bring to the table can be evaluated on an MPV and IRR model. And then the third point that you mentioned is structure. I truly think if you want to understand how well an organization is thinking about innovation, the structure of the C-suite is a good tell, because a lot of the C-suite roles, although some have evolved, frankly, it's still too siloed, in my opinion. And who really is responsible for that? And my last point is that in the next stage of retail innovation, in my opinion, is truly systematic innovation. It's, for a long time, a lot of the innovation that's been driven in retail has been done in silos. So it's done by operations or merchandising or supply chain. And truthfully, a lot of the system that now exists inside of a retailer needs open heart surgery, and the system itself needs innovating. And it's no one's job to do that. So I think the C-suite roles is a good tell as to how much focus is on innovation, and that one of the biggest challenges that's going to hold retailers back is not the Amazons of the world and Googles of the world. It's how well are you able to disrupt your own business model and structure to enable innovation to be successful in the long run. That will be the biggest barrier that I think poses challenges for a lot of innovators.
Well, I guess that naturally lends into my next question, which is this idea of Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma, which is really, in a roundabout way, part of what you're describing, right? That taking risks and innovating your way potentially out of one market into another. There's some drag on disruption. Do you think about that model? Is that something that you incorporate into your model about how you drive innovation?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in the model. In fact, a lot of my work was built on that model. If you think about the 5 years I've spent in innovation in retail, the first 3 years of that was on much more sustaining innovation. It's working on things like self-checkouts, electronic shelf labels, in-store robotics, which are still sustaining the business model, scan and go. And then where I finished my career with Walmart as the head of innovation at Blue Labs, the incubator was focused on much more disruptive 3-5+ year out innovation, which was testing things with AI, computer vision, but also playing in things like retail inside of the metaverse. So, and I can tell you, both of those jobs were fundamentally different. How I thought about and structured innovation from a sustaining standpoint versus disrupted was radically different. Much different, whether it was the structure of the team, the capabilities that you need to be able to deliver those innovation, or even the financial framework that you need to have in place with the CFO, because it just operates differently. It's very, very different. So frankly, I'd say the first part of my career where I was delivering sustaining innovation enabled the second part of my career, because if I hadn't have built a portfolio of innovation that was scaling across the organization, driving value, Blue Labs would never have existed. And frankly, that's how the conversation started. The conversation was, hey, you've kind of figured out how to do this innovation thing for us.
What's next?
Do you want to do more of it? What's next? And that was where we built Blue Labs. So I truly believe in it. And I do believe you need both as an organization. And it doesn't need to be equally weighted, but you do need to make sure that a percentage of the annual budgets are going to be set into an easy to access place for long-term innovation that's not measured on the same thresholds that the sustaining innovation would be.
I guess the metaphor or the close proximity of that is university type innovation, which is, doesn't always have a purpose. It just is innovation for innovation's sake. But out of that comes some pretty startling disruptions. Let's talk about, I just did a report for Retail Council, my quarterly report, and I asked a bunch of retailers about retail tech and where they were thinking about it. And you mentioned a couple of them. Electronic shelf tags. I talked about RFID. We talked about AI, just self-checkout, just a menu of different things. What do you think is got the potential to be the most, how do I say it? Not just necessarily disruptive, but the most beneficial, systematic, as you describe it, disruption? Or is it each of these are, distinct, but they all work together? How do you think about those? Throw out some names like that, and where's your head at?
Yeah, this is a topic that I think about a lot. I'm most excited about the blend of AI, computer vision, and robotics together. I think that ecosystem arguably would be disruptive in most retailers right now. Because I actually don't believe that there's been a significant amount of change in retail in the 16 plus years I've been part of it. If we're honest with ourselves, if you think about the retail experience from a customer perspective, if you walked around a grocery store today, there really isn't too much change, right?
Yeah,
you might see some self-checkouts. You might see some electronic shelf labels. Yeah. Probably see a few online grocery pickers and some parking spots, a lot of loyalty. Yeah. But the core operation of retail, at least from a customer perspective, hasn't changed too much. And a lot of the innovation's been behind the scenes. I truly believe that this combination, and it is emerging because when I left Walmart in January, I truly believe we're right on the edge of scaling a lot of this technology. But the blend of AI, computer vision, and robotics working inside of a retailer, not in a siloed way, but in an end-to-end way, I truly believe is disruptive on what is some of the biggest challenges in retail, like supply chain, labor allocation, merchandise, assortment strat, like all of the things that frankly right now are still heavily weighted on human decision-making and experience. If you can wrap that OODA loop of decide, act, observe, and orient in a way that can test and simulate these what are today tests in retail, that's where the power is. And it's coming because I've seen it coming, and I'm a big believer that someone's going to disrupt it very soon. Because retail, the testing in retail, if you just test a new MVP or an idea, a lot of it is we decide centrally. And then we hope that it gets executed in the field, and we hope that we get the outcome. And if you put yourself in the shoes of a CEO of a large company right now, a 12-year-old in a developing nation likely has more information at their fingertips than a CEO does. And all of the decisions that are frankly being made are often being made by experience and humans, and that's not a bad thing. I just think a lot of these decisions or strategies could be simulated through technology and innovation. So the blend of those three things coming together, let me make it a real thing. One of the cool things I got to work on that I think was really disruptive is how do you reimagine the inventory management process inside of a retail store? Because frankly, it's archaic and it's impossible for an associate to do well. You ask an associate to try and manage a store with 100,000 SKUs and $10 to $12 million in inventory and ask them to do it accurately. It's almost an impossible task, and that's just one part of the system. So we got this really cool opportunity to work with. I mean, you would see Focal Technologies, Walmart Canada, I think is one of the first retailers in the world to scale computer vision technology at the shelf edge across its stores. Almost every store, I think, by now has it. And that opportunity to just take that information and data that we've never had for the first time in the history of retail. If you think about this, Michael, if you're a merchant and you work in the home office, you've never been able to tell if a product's on the shelf unless you go to the store. Yeah, you can hope, you can pay for some reps to go in and check it. You know it's in the building maybe because you've got perpetual inventory, but you never know if it's actually on the shelf. And then you don't know if customers are looking at it, if it's in front of a pole, like whatever. There's so many different unique circumstances in retail that the power of AI computer vision, robotics coming together to make a lot of those decisions faster and to simulate them, I think is where I'm most excited.
So interesting. I think about the different projects that I've seen and come across the table. I do worry sometimes, particularly in the Canadian context, that I'm going to tie a bit of immigration policy into this, where we're bringing in temporary foreign workers and sometimes more in manufacturing. And basically you're trying to fill the gap of innovation with a lot of relatively inexpensive talent. I feel like the risk is that it suppresses innovation and technology. Do you think about that as well?
A lot. The Canadian ecosystem is a great ecosystem for innovation. You only need to think about Toronto, for example, is a great hub, but there are significant barriers that prevent it. And we know that a lot of the great IP and technology that gets invented here goes down south. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and I think it's going to be a key enabler for the Canadian economy is to keep driving an innovation ecosystem in these cities, and it attracts a lot of talent, but there's some significant barriers. There's
also been thinking about building versus buying, and last week in the news, Amazon talked about putting, I don't know, $4 billion into an AI company. You mentioned AI. It's interesting because we do see this sometimes in many organizations. Well, they'll go out and buy innovation basically, and then try to incorporate it into the enterprise. Are you a fan of that? Is there a role for that in enterprises?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of it, and I think there's a big role for it, especially as change speeds up. Like, I don't know if you listen too much of Ray Kurzweil, but he talks about by the end of this decade, he believes that 1 year of change is going to happen within 12 days, and that's the pace of technological evolution. He's one of the world's leading futurists. And I think we see that, actually. I think we see that with artificial intelligence. When AI when it came out earlier this year as the hot topic, and everybody was talking about it, where it started to where it is now is unbelievable. I mean, it started just like the early stage internet with really gimmicky things like generating images. That was the same as the internet. I remember a program, if you remember this, there was a website called $1 Million Homepage, which was just a picture of 1 million pictures on one page, or dogs.com. And the guy was a billionaire just by having pictures of dogs on the internet. And I think we've seen the same with AI at the early stages. It was really novel things, right? But I think the amount of plugins and the real business use applications that have emerged since is moving at a speed that I've never seen. So I do believe there's an opportunity, especially as things get faster. But I still think it comes back to organizational structure and culture, because I've seen too many examples of where you bring great talent in and it just doesn't work. We aren't able to adopt their mindset. We put too much bureaucracy around what they need to do. So with the right teams and the right support and structure, I think there's a place for it. But unfortunately, I've seen far too many failures where it just doesn't work out because of the structure of the mothership.
Yeah, it's an evocative idea, right? Bring in that startup, that innovator, and we'll put that DNA in the organization, and 1 + 1 = 3. I mean, it sounds very good at the high level, but I know what you mean exactly. So, listen, last question for you. Advice to the listeners, and I'm going to frame this in a kind of a 2-start, 1-stop. And of course, listeners, the vast majority of which will not have access to the resources you might have had at Walmart in terms of innovation. But let's talk about principle and practice. Give me some advice for the listeners around 2 things they should start doing if they want to innovate at the speed of disruption, as my partner Steve Dennis says, and 1 thing they should stop trying to do because it's just not and won't be successful.
I think the first one is, I actually believe most of the barriers to innovation are human barriers. So I think the first one is start and find the cheapest and fastest way to test your idea and get the idea out of your head. It's amazing how many great ideas are stuck in people's heads. And the first stage of any idea is writing it down, putting it in front of people, meaning write it out or draw it out and see their response. Because we're good at convincing ourselves every idea is a great idea. But it's funny, I used to run workshops on this, and just to try and convince people to take a pen or pad and try and draw out or write out their idea, it's fascinating to watch, because It means that you need to put your idea to the world, and the potential of rejection or people laughing at it, all those things that you put in your head as potential outcomes that frankly rarely ever happen, are just barriers to people. So the first thing is like write it down, draw it out, put it in front of a bunch of people. And ideally, all those people can't be your family and friends because they're also slightly biased to telling you it's a great idea. And then the second would be about incentive. Like I think you've got to find a way to incentivize your teams for long-term innovation. If you're asking people to stand up, to take risks, to fail, to come back with multiple iterations of something that's not working and to be wrong more than they are right, there's got to be an incentive for them. I laughed. I said this to my mom at times. I said, if I promoted people on the amount of times they failed at Walmart, the amount of promotions we would have done, at least in the Blue Labs team, would have been exponential because that was their role. It was to fail. So I think, first write it down, draw it out. 2, find an incentive. To make sure that you can, there's a long-term value and a benefit for the people that are willing to break the status quo. Those are the 2 starts that I would work on. I would say stop judging the idea. That sounds crazy, but ideas are easy to come by. Everybody's got them. Start judging the evidence that other people think that idea is good. So I think we, as humans, naturally, we think it's a good or bad idea and we'll close ideas down. I would never judge the idea on the surface. I would say, go and find me evidence, and that could be an early MVP test. You put it in front of 15 people in the streets of Toronto. It could be anything, and you judge the evidence that other people believe it's a good idea. Because if you judge it right on the surface, you'll potentially miss an opportunity to iterate into something great. And most great innovation never came straight out of a sticky note and implemented exactly how it was first formed. So those are the pieces of advice I'd give to the listeners.
Well, fantastic. I mean, let's say it's been a great discussion. You're back from your Canadian tour. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, learn more, or keep up with what you're thinking, are you a LinkedIn type person, or where's a good place to go?
LinkedIn. Yeah, now my traveling's out the way for a while too. I'll be much more active back on there again. But yeah, LinkedIn's typically the place that I'm most active.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, Lee, thanks so much for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. Fascinating discussion. Wish you much continued success, and I think you're at the point of the spear, so to speak, in retail. It needs a lot of disruption. There's a lot of disruption and needs a lot of innovation. So thanks for filling us in and giving us some advice. And like I said, continued success.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker, Rethink Retail 2023 Global Top Retail Influencer. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.